Hello and welcome, bookworms. Welcome to this week's episode of The Contented Narrative. I'm looking at The Vanishing by Bennett. Now, this one was recommended to me by my sister Nikki, and as you guys know, I am much more a physical copy kind of girl. You know, I've got my hardbacks, I've got my folio societies, I've got my special editions, I've got my signed by the authors, I've got my normal paperbacks. I love them. But when I'm going abroad, when weight becomes an issue in my suitcase, I tend to download books on the Kindle. And to be perfectly honest, sometimes as well, if I'm unsure about a book, I'll download it on the Kindle if it's a little bit cheaper, because of just the sheer amount of books that I buy. But you know, so as I said, this one was recommended to me by my sister, and it follows two twins. It follows Stella and Desiree. And it starts off with Desiree coming back to her hometown, and everyone being like, oh my God, what happened to her? Because essentially what had happened is years ago, Stella and Desiree one night just vanished, just up and vanished. And there was no preamble to it that anyone could notice. There was nothing where someone went, oh, X, Y, and Z, this is why. None of that. They just vanished into thin air. So Desiree comes back with a child in tow. And essentially what's happened is she's ended up in a relationship with someone that is beating her. So she's got herself out and she's come back home to Mallard to be with her mum. And she kind of starts building a life for her and her daughter there. But then you get a lot of Desiree's story at the beginning, but you don't really learn much about Stella until sort of later in the book. And then you kind of start getting from Stella's point of view. And what I will say is, because the way it's described is they are mixed race but can present as white. So what's happened is Stella, when she went for a job, when they'd run away, she'd gone for this job and they just assumed she was white. So she got the job and everything and she didn't correct anybody. And then she basically put on her white persona, as she says in the book. It's got nothing to do with it, but as she says in the book, it puts on a white persona. So Stella's living with her husband and her child, who is described as having like beautiful blonde hair and blah. So you wouldn't think that there's any sort of black in her at all. And she's got this life where she's terrified of anybody finding out about her past, about who her parents were, because her dad was lynched. You know, and her mum's like a cleaner. So she's presenting as this completely different person. And she's kind of like terrified that anyone's going to find that out. So it's a really interesting take. And me and Nikki had a really good discussion about it after I finished reading it. Because obviously, me reading it, I don't know. I honestly, what I take from it is from the background and the life that I've led, where I'm like, I don't have to pretend to be something or a different colour or presenting in a different... The only time that, you know, I present differently is you've got my work persona and my home persona. They're very rarely the same. But I don't present as a different race because I don't have to. It's not part of who I am. So when we were sort of discussing it, because obviously I was getting enraged by the way that Stella was like full on just cut off her twin sister, cut off her parent, like her mum, and even when there's sorts of start to be her past eking into her present and everything, she's still absolutely adamant. No, that's not me. I'm not who you say you are. Blah blah blah. You know, and it's like she's cut that part of herself out, and she can't find a way back to it. And I was getting really annoyed, being like, but you know, she's stopped her daughter having any chance to know who her family is. She's stopped her daughter of having a proper part of her heritage in regards to sort of like knowing where she comes from, knowing who her family is, knowing who her grandma is, and stuff like that. And it was I was getting really pissed off at Stella, but then Nikki offered a good alternative, being like, well, you don't know what it was like, you know, for her. Obviously, you know, it doesn't say that it's based on a real story, and if it is, I do apologize. But like, for someone to feel that their life isn't good enough in the race, in their real world, that they have to change who they are so fundamentally, how can we get so annoyed about it? So it became a good, and I think the book itself I thought was good. Not great, but good. I was like, do you know what? It's all right. It is what it is. And I enjoyed reading it, do you know what I mean? But I probably wouldn't go back to it. But I would say give it a go. But from the the conversations that I've been able to have afterwards, I think that's what gives that book that little bit extra, because it's a bit thought-provoking. So although the book itself and the characters themselves are good, they're not great, they're good, and I did enjoy reading it, and it was, you know, very enjoyable. As I said, I might have enjoyed it far more, you know, depending on the circumstances of who I am and so on and so forth. So, you know, I'm not taking away from anyone's perspective of this, but the conversations that I was then having off the back of that with my sister about the ins and outs of the characters, I think added more layers to the book than it necessarily would have had if I'd just read it and put it down. So I would definitely recommend giving it a read, because as I said, it was a good, enjoyable book. But I mean, I read it on holiday, but it is a holiday read. It's like a beach read. You don't have to turn your brain on. And if you're wanting to have a good discussion about it, you know, reach out to other people, get them to read it with you as well. But obviously, if you agree or disagree with anything that I'm saying, please leave it below in the comments, you know. But thank you so much for your continued support. And remember to always keep it contento.